Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure compilation, The Malady Chronicles by, deep breaths, Jason Bakos, Themis Paraskevas, Aviezer, Clan Crafter Hralding, Dylan Hyatt, Chad Lensch, GM Lent, Richard Malena-Webber, CM O'Halloran, John D. Parker, and Blaise Wigglesworth for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Y'all with these compilations, my goodness. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rivzung. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos de Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. So, last year, it was approximately November of 2018, in fact, that I reviewed the Malady Codex, which was by these doctors / D&D DM's Guild creators that created some new diseases for D&D. I was very positive on the Malady Codex. I thought it was pretty cool to see these custom diseases with some very complicated and others just interesting symptoms and cures, and all very good rules. So definitely check that out if you haven't heard of that before. The Malady Chronicles essentially builds upon that and creates a series of adventures based on those diseases. I don't think it's an exact one-to-one in terms of every disease in that book got an adventure here, but I definitely recognized some of the names, and I went back to the Malady Codex and found that most of them, I think, are represented here. So this includes 9 adventures, which I believe, for the most part, are based on those custom new diseases from the Malady Codex. You do not have to have own or read or know about any of the diseases in the Malady Codex, because they are all obviously included here, which means this basically supplants the need for that one, unless, of course, you just want the diseases themselves. The adventures I am generally positive on. I think they do a pretty good job, for the most part, of utilizing that theme of whatever disease it's using. There tends to be a bigger focus on exploration and investigation than a lot of adventures of this scale, and this scale is definitely more of the shorter one-shot variety than it is like multi-step, huge, encompassing adventures, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think, one-shots are definitely very useful for DMs to be able to plop into a campaign. One thing that I really like to see here is it has an overarching campaign that attempts to actually tie all the adventures together. So those 9 adventures range in level from 1 to 15, like a published adventure from Wizards of the Coast, and you can actually run them as if they were tied into a campaign. Now that's a neat idea, but the execution isn't quite there. It definitely feels like the creators were all given like their own license to just kind of create their own adventure, and then once these were all created, then there was an attempt to bridge them together with various connections, and that's kind of the vibe I got off of it. So it's not really the best working campaign, and plus it's a weird campaign to have like each one has its own disease theme. So it's like, why do your characters continually have to run afoul of all these diseases? Well, the overarching campaign is there's this like god of disease that's coming up and causing all these problems, and that's not that bad. It also creates a non-ending, though, and it even mentions in the part of the campaign, which we'll go ahead and jump into that because that's actually in the introduction here, that there's not really the actual part of the campaign ends, with the boss of the level 12 to 15 one, which is the last one here. But the finale against the god, it's like, well, how do you want to handle doing that? It just kind of tries to come up with a way to connect these adventures together, but I don't think it quite does a good enough job to where I would be really interested in running this as a campaign. And I hate to put that as a con, because I don't want to discourage creators from doing that. I think it's a really neat idea. It's something I want to see in the future for more adventure compilations, as an attempt to actually bridge them together and create a campaign, especially if there's a neat theme, like they all take place like around one location, for example. And this one very much all takes place around Waterdeep or around like swamps and stuff that you could put near Waterdeep. So I think particularly if you're running Dragon Heist or just any urban-based adventure, these adventures could work very, very well together. I don't think I would necessarily recommend running this as a full-on campaign, but thankfully you don't have to do that. They can all work as separate, as I mentioned, one-shot adventures that you can just plop down. And they're all really more designed to do that. It's just that there was this extra step provided that kind of tries to create, like, hey, go do this mission, go do that mission. But it just happens that the characters end up following this thread that I didn't feel like was really baked into a meaningful story. So it's a bummer because I really liked seeing this campaign, but it just, once I actually read the adventures and then went back to the campaign, I was like, oh, this actually doesn't quite make much sense, and I wasn't terribly impressed with it. But I did like that the level ranges are so wide here. So you really have an adventure opportunity for just about every level. The beginning one is designed for levels 1 through 4. They suggest level 2 because who the hell wants to play level 1 characters? I don't blame them. All the way up to a 12 to 15 for the final one, which is like an Illithid layer, recommended for 13. So that's pretty cool. Just that alone, you get a wide range of adventures here. I'm going to go over some of the included content, and then I'll kind of briefly skim through some of the adventures and mainly highlight my favorites. But overall, I'm pretty positive on this adventure. It's not quite as mind-blowingly as amazing as some of the previous adventure compilations, which I think I've already reviewed like 3 this month alone. Y'all are killing me with these 200-page, amazingly put together DM's Guild Adept products. Just absolutely incredible. I am having to be a workhorse to be a reviewer for this stuff, but it's not quite as mind-blowing as something like Hellbound Heist in terms of the quality of the adventures, but I did really appreciate the theme, and I also appreciated that a lot of these adventures do focus more on investigation and social checks and exploration rather than just going through like yet another dungeon crawl. So I did like that aspect of it. One of the biggest pluses this adventure does is provide a bunch of sample characters. I don't think any adventure certainly adventures alone typically do not come with characters, like pre-made characters. Maybe if it's designed for like, hey, here's a newbie, level 1 adventure, and here's some sample characters. I have seen that, but this is an entire adventure compilation, and it includes 7, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pre-made characters, and these are some of the best pre-made characters I have seen in a long time, which is not what I expected out of a adventure compilation based on diseases. These are all characters that, like, I mean, you can see right here, have extensive backgrounds and backstories. They have descriptions, their appearance, they have artwork. Their stat block is already provided for you, so they've already got their stats, already rolled up. So that's obviously what a pre-made sheet is. Quotes in place. They all kind of know each other, through various connective tissues. So if you wanted to play characters and you're always coming up with how does this party, how do you even know each other? How does this very diverse group of heroes always ends up being? How do you all end up even knowing each other, let alone working together? And this provides a lot of good reason for that. So that's really impressive. I was honestly blown away by how well done these various characters are. It's just really neat to have, and I was very surprised by that. Also includes a bunch of magic items, which are very, very appropriate for any kind of disease-related adventure. For example, all the adventures in this book, for the most part, plague doctor masks and kits, and some more equipment rather than magic items, but they might have some of those kind of effects of a magic item. But I like that they're more on the common side, so you can specifically offer these up as things for lower level characters to even be able to just purchase rather than have to like find at the end of a dungeon, for example. All right, so the adventures. Real quickly, because there are 9 here. Blossom of OSHADIS is the lowest level adventure. This one is a very typical dungeon crawl. It's pretty straightforward. You're supposed to find this flower that can cure the disease. And that really is the only tie toward the actual disease here. You're just trying to find the specific cure. The part that I like about this adventure is that it actually starts you at the end of the dungeon, and you wake up from like amnesia, and you realize that's the effects of this disease playing on the characters. So it kind of fucks up their memory and their minds a little bit. So that part's pretty cool. And obviously, this is a running theme in all these adventures, where your characters, pretty much for the most part, all get inflicted with the disease, and they then have to combat the effects while also trying to solve the adventure's investigation. In this case, you start off at the end of the dungeon. All you have is like a note that's telling you need to get this flower and get out, and then you're being hunted by cultists. There's a little bit of traps everywhere. It's not very big. It's not very involved, but I do like the twist that you start off basically waking up in the middle of in the end of a dungeon, not even knowing what's going on. And it even mentions in the text that's a tricky thing to pull off. You don't really want to take away agency from your players very often, but I think that is something you can do pretty effectively at the beginning of an adventure or the beginning of a campaign. Think about, something like Skyrim that has you on a cart going to get your head chopped off. And all that stuff is very much railroaded in there, and you're led the way. Even though that game is completely open world, and that's what people remember, the very beginning is still very much heavily railroaded and putting you in a certain spot at a certain time. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that for the beginning of an adventure. And I think because it's a low-level adventure, it's might very well be the beginning. I think that can be pretty effective. This one also has some of the better maps of the adventure. Maps is obviously something I always cover in my reviews because it's a big stickler as somebody who plays on Roll20 and primarily uses maps. Maps are unfortunately very wildly from this one, which probably has some of the best maps of the group in terms of it has a full color top-down map and a full color isometric cutout map, which I really do like these maps, and these are provided as separate, like a zipped handout folder. I love seeing these maps on dungeons because it really lets you get a full visualization of what is the height differences and how does it look that you really can't get with a top-down battle map. But I need the top-down battle map to actually use. So having both of them is honestly the best of both worlds. That is absolutely amazing. This is the best case scenario. Unfortunately, the adventures range from this case all the way to no maps whatsoever. On average, an adventure usually contains one decent battle map. It might be kind of smallish, but it'll cover like one scene. And because these are typically short one-shots, usually don't need more than that. But it's a bummer because I looked at this first adventure, looked at this map set, and was like, and I literally was like, yes, finally, there's going to be awesome maps throughout. And then you can imagine my disappointment as that was definitely not the case because this one has the single best map quality of all of them. And some of them have like region maps. And as I said, there's even one of them that has no maps whatsoever, and it was one that really needed a map. It takes place in like an underground dwarven mining tunnel with a lot of stuff going on, and there's no map whatsoever. So that's really a big bummer, and unfortunately, going to be a big con for this adventure because it's something I mentioned for previous adventure compilations. Is I wish that for map purposes, they could really come up with a uniform map style so that every adventure in a compilation has the same map quality, like the same artist, whatever it is, that creates that consistency that we really like to see. Otherwise, instead, it's by adventure and adventure. I am going to be leaning more towards the ones that have the better maps, even if some of them might, I think, be better adventures, and that's not fair. So I would really have liked to see the same map quality and the same attention to that been given to every adventure in here. And I say that for all these adventure compilations. I hope that's the case. And as I mentioned, they all include their own diseases that is involved here. So pretty much everything from the Malady Codex, I believe. Some of them might be new from Malady Codex, but they might be still based on ones that are from Malady Codex, or at least use the same way to build a disease from there, which is including its symptoms, usually multiple stages, any kind of saving throws, how to diagnose it, how to cure it, and all that. So that's pretty cool to see, and obviously all the relevant stat blocks for new creatures. Really good artwork throughout that I have noticed. I think a combination of stock art, but also original art, just different kinds too. Full page art, half page art, nicely laid out. I expected this, frankly, because the Malady Codex is very well put together in terms of its art and presentation and font and editing and all that, and I was not disappointed with the Malady Chronicles. It is definitely that above and beyond for sure. The King's Evil is one of my favorite adventures. This one is basically your players have to infiltrate a leper colony, which is this disease is the King's Evil. And it's a really cool like prison camp scenario. There's a lot of neat stuff going on with the players. Have to kind of mind their own business but still figure out that it's a rescue mission. They're trying to rescue somebody. And of course, they figure out that things are much deeper and darker and more dire than they anticipated. Eventually going down to a mine and realizing there's this meteorite down there that apparently can halt all the healing, which is preventing anybody from this leper colony / concentration camp from being healed. And then, of course, there's the boss of the area who has like a ring that can transform people into oozes. So you might find somebody that's like half turned into a gibbering mouther. Just a really cool scenario with a lot of neat ideas and neat things, good role-playing notes for everybody. Nice artwork. I just really like this adventure a lot. And I like the idea of this kind of leper colony that puts the players in a tricky situation, but gives them a lot of different options and just a lot of good combination of combat, role playing, and exploration. It's really got everything. So probably if I had to pick one to be my favorite, it would probably be this one, but certainly in the top 3. Plaguebearers. I don't even remember much about this one, which probably tells you it's not. Oh, this is the orc clan. So your players end up working for an orc clan, which would be probably not sitting well with certain player characters, depending on what their proclivities are. And they're fighting a bunch of furbolgs, and they end up having one of their own gets afflicted with a disease, and the disease is on the furbolgs, and then it's on the orcs, and then at the end, this just druid walks in and just can't wait to see everybody die, and then like walks away. It's a very odd anticlimactic part that basically involves you having to burn the entire orc like village to the ground. There's a few things you can do to try to like save some of them, but it just had a very odd story flow to it. And the only map that's included is this like random jungle map, which also seemed kind of odd because there's this entire like furbolg fortress that you end up assaulting. So I don't know. I wasn't really feeling this one too much. Rise of the Druid's Curse. This one gets a little nuts. It tells a pretty cool, interesting story, I think, for the most part, with really showing off. That would be the wife. Really showing off like how a disease can ravage an entire city, and it's got at least like one good character that you can recruit and have kind of join the party as an NPC. But it kind of goes off the walls in terms of this scope. Like, again, these are pretty short one-shots. And this one, you get messages of, like, this entire city of, I think, Waterdeep falling apart. Like, tens of thousands are succumbing to this disease that's caused by these fleas from this farmhouse that you end up in drawing all the way back to and investigating. It's just really nuts. Like, at one point, you see the Griffin Cavalry, like, essentially napalming, like, firebombing their city just to contain the threat. Like, it gets a little too big for its britches, frankly, for the kind of story it's trying to tell. You don't have to be that dire and epic with what is kind of a condensed area. So I have kind of mixed feelings about how that one ends up working. Here's a good example of this is more along the lines of the actual maps that we get, which is kind of smaller, like one kind of scene, probably not color. It's okay. It's not great. And unfortunately, this is more of what we get from most of the maps rather than that first one you saw, which was the cool, like full color, isometric and top-down map. And I wish that was applied to all of these other ones. That would have been really cool to see. Viral Village. This one is all about investigating a disease, as is most of them. This one is even more investigation than normal. This one has the demon's influence disease, and there's one person who's trying to cure everybody, and it's pretty obvious that he is like, part of the problem rather than the solution. So you figure that out pretty quickly. I guess there's some good steps with with investigating it, but it didn't quite grab me as much because it just seems pretty obvious that this guy is the part of the problem of the entire area. It's this whole fungal like demon virus. So I wasn't terribly too interested. This one doesn't include any maps whatsoever. It's got an overall map of the town here, and then a handout of the actual plant that is causing the problem, the actual disease. The Purification of CALAQ. I'm having to look at my notes because I'm literally having 9 adventures in one here. This one also does not include a battle map, unfortunately. This one is also, I think, the shortest one, and pretty much just involves a journey into the swamps. So there's this one has a neat backstory with the black dragon, kind of like feasting on this like coatl and gaining this special breath weapon that can essentially afflict people with this certain disease and keeps everybody in this area in check. But if you want immunity, the dragon can grant that to you, but then you have to swear yourself to the dragon. So there's this big corrupting influence here between this dragon and this other agency that can sell like elixirs. Everybody thinks, well, they must work for the dragon because they're charging exorbitant prices for it. And it basically just comes down to kind of a journey in the swamp and just a bunch of series of encounters. There's an invisible genie that's pledged itself to the dragon who has to fight you, and it's, he's sad about it, but just very, very short, straightforward. There's really no like dungeon involved or anything of that nature. So I liked the idea behind that one, but I didn't think it actually went into any kind of interesting places. If you can't tell, these middle ones, I wasn't too big of a fan of. I liked the first 2, and then those next 3, I was kind of meh on. Under DovLA Mountain, we start getting a little bit better. This is the one that really needed some kind of a map because I think it's a cool idea, and there's a lot of social stuff going on. So with this particular area, there's 3 dwarven families that are in this mining outpost underground. The entire thing takes place in this dwarven mine. They all don't trust each other very well, and this disease, which is this mold kind of disease, spreads, and the distrust goes even worse. So this is also a good example of like literally witnessing a disease ravage a community, but also a community that's already tense and kind of can be at each other's throats. And there's interesting rules for like how the dwarves feel towards the players, as well as where they are progressing in the disease can also determine where they fall. And that a lot of what the players' actions do leading up to the finale will determine who is on what side, essentially. And even breaks down it from scenario to scenario. Is like what kind of factions are put into place. So this one's a really cool idea. It seems very complex from a DM standpoint in terms of having to run all these different factions and basically keep track of the every character's attitude towards the party. There's some neat events, like a freaking purple worm attacks at one point. There's a shit ton of dwarves attacking it, which also seems like a nightmare to run for a DM, but kind of a cool encounter anyway. And a bunch of Umber Hulks appear right afterwards, as if a purple worm needed freaking additional creatures to cause a problem. You can see here that one of the handouts is literally like this kind of Game of Thrones style chart almost that tells you like who hates who and who's working for what, because it does get pretty complicated. But I really like the idea here, and it does a good job of focusing on the disease as a primary tool that frames the entire adventure. And some of the scenarios don't do a good enough job with using their disease. The disease might just be an excuse to like attack somebody or go to an area and help rescue it. Some of them, it does involve like investigating it, so it does have an overarching theme, but this one I think particularly does a good job with that. The Passenger is also one of my favorite adventures because I think illithids are just freaking cool, and this one does some really cool stuff with it. So it uses the Passenger virus from the Malady, I think it's from the Malady Codex, which is basically an illithid created virus where they can see out of different creatures, like a brain virus. And this one just has a very memorable moment where you essentially investigate a bunch of crime scenes, which already is a cool idea. Definitely let your players be like, FBI agents in an area and they're tracking things down and clues. I just think that makes for a really fun D&D session in general. This one has that in spades, as well as the sergeant actually being afflicted by the Passenger virus, so he grows increasingly like deranged and things, which is also really cool. And it eventually leads them to an illithid restaurant where, of course, all of the patrons are thralls. The staff is run by illithids, and if the players manage to get all the way to where they're sitting down and ready to be served, they open the platter and there's an intellect devourer there, and everybody attacks. Like, it's just fucking great. I just love that whole sequence. That's amazing. I love it. I just think that's so memorable and cool. And this one does provide some nice maps, and we get multiple maps. We get one of for battles in the city streets, as well as the actual restaurant. And I mentioned in the beginning, did I not? This was specifically very well designed for an urban campaign. Almost all of these adventures take place in cities, with the exception of, I think we had one in the swamp, maybe one or two in a swamp, and then there was that one under the dwarven mountain. But I mean, you could put those, near a city, so you could really, really well done for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and you could maybe put them in the beginning of Baldur's Gate, although this is starting to get high level stuff now. I think this one is level 10, and then the final one, A Shadow over Waterdeep, is level 12. This one, the only ones that really work well together are these last two, because they both involve illithids. I don't know if these designers actually work together, if they both just liked illithids, and the compilers just thought like, oh well, these can work well together, but these work well with each other. And yes, this is an illithid dragon that serves as the final boss. This one probably does one of the least good jobs. I'll call you in a second, dear. These ones probably do one of the worst jobs of actually having their disease theme, because while I was reading it, I read it all the way through, and then only at the end did I remember, oh yeah, this is supposed to be about a disease. But I like this adventure because it is a dungeon crawl, and I like my dungeon crawls. Specifically a high-level illithid dungeon that plays out like an asylum horror movie with a lot of crazy shit, like you come across mind flayers performing like open surgery on a still living creature and like that kind of messed up stuff. There's a great part where players can like pull a lever and this squid thing will recite the last thoughts of various brains floating in jars. And there's a great note where, because again, players could be level 12 to 15, there might be an opportunity for players to actually use the regenerate or reincarnate or some kind of spell to actually bring somebody back from their brain. And there are rules that some of the characters will actually become NPCs that can join the party. That's awesome. That's crazy. Not something I would think of if I were a player, but certainly at that level, players do have those kind of options. So also really good map for this one, although I believe you only get the isometric map. We didn't get the 2 different ones, so we didn't actually get the battle map with this one, but it's a neat little dungeon layer. I just didn't quite get the theme of the actual disease so much in this one, because I guess the initial thought is the disease is cause a bunch of sleepwalkers, and the sleepwalkers are just going to this dungeon, so that it kind of leads you to the dungeon, but then once you're there, it's just really more of a standard dungeon crawl. Standard being the fact that I still really like this dungeon crawl, so it probably is actually one of my favorite adventures. Just doesn't quite hit that disease theme quite as well. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Malady Chronicles. Pros includes 9 different adventures that range from dungeon crawls to crime investigations to rescue heists. Heists, good variety of adventures. Pro, the overarching storyline that optionally connects all adventures into one campaign. Despite my misgivings of the actual execution of it, I'm putting it in my pro column because I really like to see that, and I want to see other creators of adventure compilations try and create a campaign out of all these adventures. And reading this, it's easy to see how difficult it is to do that, especially if none of the designers are directly working with each other. They're just kind of creating, maybe they get an assignment based on, hey, create an adventure out of this disease. I think maybe you could make it work, but I wish there were a little more, at least giving us a proper finale to using this as a campaign. Because as it is, I think it leaves you a little bit wanting. But I really like that effort was given. It's not just a paragraph; it's like a couple pages towards just putting it together as a campaign. Pro, I was really impressed with the 7 pre-made player characters. They have excellent, well thought out backstories. Just did not expect that at all in this compilation. And Pro, 14 disease and doctor related items. Technically, I guess categorized as magic items, but I guess really more of equipment. Cons, map quality varies from full color and multiple angles to no maps whatsoever. Some of the maps are great, some of the maps are okay, and some of them have no maps whatsoever. So that kind of inconsistency really bugs the crap out of me. I would have loved to see a more consistent art and map style used for every single adventure. At least one battle map per adventure if it involves any kind of extensive combat or boss battle or something, I think should be expected. And con, the adventures vary in length. Most are closer to one-shots, and some don't focus enough on their chosen disease. So, on average, I did like the adventures. I liked them more than I didn't like them, but there were some that I didn't like. And there were some that I don't think quite capitalized on their disease very well. And there were some that I thought were just too short. So there is a good variety of theme, but unfortunately, it also, I think, was too much of a variety in quality. Final verdict. Based on the diseases from the Malady Codex, the Malady Chronicles builds a series of interesting adventures with a large focus on discovering and investigating a series of deadly plagues. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.